In the last video, I explained how you can chart out a single moment for somebody, or even chart out a long moment for somebody. And then when you put it within a blast circle, you can see how they move towards or against specific ideas or thoughts or even things that they might like or dislike. In the same way, uh, these moments can actually become manufactured in a way. Not manufactured in the fact that they come through a factory, but people have figured out what this means and how to use it and how to promote it and, give people the moments that they want. So there are a lot of industries that make a moment for you, or specifically try to make a moment for you. And so that's what this lecture is on. In a previous article, I mentioned RealLife Games, and I showed this wonderful lecture by a guy who makes a great book called Level Up, and he covers, things like, you'll have specific things that are easy to spot up in the distance, so that you can always know where you are and you always have a goal in mind. And then they use darks and lights to kind of make things become, easy to spot or something you want to take in. And they do this specifically to kind of control where you're going. You're always moving forward. You're always moving. You're never stopping. And if you are going to stop, they have these little zone areas where where they have chairs and you kind of stop and sit. But they're always built in kind of a circle so that everybody goes around that quickly. And so nobody is ever in the way. Nobody is ever a problem. And that's kind of their goal, is you are constantly moving in these shows, and you are constantly being kind of controlled by creating an anticipation and making you think about, or not really making you think about it, and constantly giving you those moments. You're walking through a Disneyland and you discover somebody dressed as the Beast, and because your mind is ready to accept this kind of status, you accept that the Beast is in front of you. You know it's a guy in a suit. It's in your mind. But a part of you believes what he has actually seen, or doesn't believe what he's actually seen, and instead takes on the imaginary for what they have. So this is a very common thing to promote products. We have events, and I have two little articles here, so you can freeze frame and type it up. The Verge has the psychology on why lines are promoted. I loved the comment where they say that if you get in a line for something, you already anticipate or expect the thing that you're going to is good. Even if it's bad, you've gotten into a line and you have already decided that it is good. And so, people make these events for buying the product itself. People make events for buying a console or buying a specific game, and they have people dress up, and they have a little mini convention for that night only, where people are in long lines and people are tossing around soda and stuff like that. I was actually at the Star Wars Episode 1 line in my hometown, or one of my hometowns, and it was supposed to be this major event, and we were all kind of joking around and really happy. And there were sing-alongs, and it was sing-alongs to Star Wars music. There weren't any words. We just went da 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 da. Now imagine 300 people doing that. Yes, really, it was a first major nerd moment in a cultural history where they promoted a nerdy idea as mainstream. And yeah, there were people that were kind of mocked on it and stuff, but the movie sold well, and it became a major cultural thing. And to be honest with you, Marvel movies and all that are coming from that idea. So people create these events, and they create this concept that if you truly love this, you're going to come see it. You're going to get into the line, and the line is going to make you anticipate this more, and it's going to promote this idea into you that this movie is good, even if it kind of sucks. I had sort of that thing happen when I watched the Wonder Woman. I speak a lot of languages, and oh my gosh, they were so bad with language, I nearly got out of my seat and left the room. I was so PO'd. I actually stood up and said, "That's not Chinese." It was supposed to be this moment where he's like, "Oh, how's your Mandarin?" And I'm like, "That's not Mandarin. That's not even close to Mandarin. What are you doing?" And yeah, that's a problem. Oh, wait for that. Okay. So we come into this culture industry, and that comes from a Marxist thought pattern. Back in the 60s and 70s, they had pretty much all the people writing stuff were Marxists. And they're like, look at this industry that we have, and look at, how we're constantly being told to consume. And to be honest with you, they were promoting this to the baby boomers and to the Generation Xers and to the millennials a lot. I remember He-Man, and I didn't just want to watch He-Man. I wanted to buy the He-Man toys, and I wanted to buy, the He-Man Nesquik or Quick. And to this day, I actually have fond memories of Strawberry Quick while watching She-Ra, and that's not a joke. Every time I see it, I think of that one time when I was a kid and we were living in San Francisco for like a week, and we had Strawberry Quick, and we watched She-Ra. Like that's such a fond memory that I think of that every single time I see this thing. And so they do the same thing where they constantly bombard you with these ideas and these thoughts and these things, and they don't give you any information. They just say, okay, well, this is what's happening. This is how you should think about it, and you just kind of believe it. And the culture industry is interesting. The commentary on the culture industry is that it's not real, and eventually you figure it out. You recognize the fakeness within it. Here's some examples. For the lines for the PlayStation 3, there was a major line of people there for this big console, and they were, shouting about how big the line was. And the first person to get the PlayStation 3 was brought onto stage, and they were talking to him. And it turns out he couldn't speak the language. It was a Japanese. It was in Japan, but the guy was paid to be in the line, and he didn't speak Japanese. And then the next person didn't speak Japanese. And it turns out almost everybody in the line was paid to be there. Nobody was there for the PlayStation. And that was a moment where, the observers were just like, oh no. But they continued to promote the idea that the PlayStation 3 had this big line because that was their job. And that's where, you just start to see this fakeness, this unreality, where the hyper-reality starts to kind of fade a bit. And that's where the hyper becomes common, where you've seen this so many times, it doesn't become as great in your mind. In the last video, I showed how a person for the first time got to ask cosplayers, it was my cousin, about the show, or, to take their picture, and she was so overwhelmed that she suddenly wanted to come to the show more. Now, I had been at this show for several days already, and I had already done the show multiple times, so I was accustomed to cosplayers and asking for their picture and, just everything there. And it was actually a moment where I was walking around going, I remember this show being so huge, where I would get lost when I was walking through it, and now I just know where everything is. I know what all the stuff is. I'm not really impressed by what I see. This, it just seems to have shrunk because I know what it all is. Whereas the person who has seen it for the first time just is overwhelmed by all this information. In the same way that Calvin is overwhelmed by TV, we have people who just take all this hyperreality and it just becomes common. And I've chosen Baron Munchausen because he was constantly talking about the weird stuff in the world. And, that's how he did things. And, he was so proper about it. And kind of the joke was the uncommon became happened so often to him that he simply didn't know how to deal with common things anymore. He was just he was either a blowhard or he was a complete adventurer, and nobody knew which one was which for him. Kind of an interesting story. And I was actually going to show you a picture from time bandits where the first real scene in the movie has this kid watching his parents watching TV and going, okay, we should buy this product. Oh, we should buy this product. Oh, we should buy this product. And his shelves are just full of products that they bought and will never use. And I couldn't help thinking that, the vast majority of that doesn't exist anymore. We don't really have that as much. I mean, yes, we have, movies, but we watch those movies. And to be honest with you, with, digital streaming and stuff, we don't buy those movies as much. And the same thing with, video games. We don't buy video games, or video games are easier to store. And our cupboards have been cleared. We don't have as much stuff. We don't buy as much stuff. And it just starts to not work anymore. The culture industry is at kind of this crossroads where it's not working anymore, and they know it, but they don't know how to stop it. Or, they don't know how to go back. And the people watching this are like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. So what the culture industry does is they promote to the noobs. And then they kind of promote to the people who are already hooked. My examples here are, obviously, this is the people who had their picture taken for the first time, or not for the first time for them, but for the first time for my cousin. And, she was overwhelmed, and she thought this was amazing that they would just pose for her. And, for her first time, that was amazing. For me, I was just like, oh, okay, this is really cool. It actually took me several days afterwards to grow accustomed to people not wanting their picture taken. It was a real shock for me, in fact. And then we also have a clear example. Here is a Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble is going under. We don't know when it's going under, but we know it's suffering a lot. And as a historian, as an anthropologist, I go through their sections and I just can't help but noticing that their history section and their culture section really isn't for somebody who wants to study this subject a lot or who understands this subject really well. It's for the noobs. It's for the people who kind of want to get into the subject, but they don't want to get too far into it. Just the start, and it has all the World War II stuff, which is usually a sign that you haven't studied history too much. And, stuff like that, where it's very basic history for, people who want to sound like they know history instead of people who actually study history. It is for the noobs. They aren't promoting any books for anything deeper than who they think their consumer is, and their consumer is kind of noob, which is kind of interesting because this is also supposed to be a place where nerds meet and greet each other. But if it's being promoted to noobs, where are the nerds meeting? Kind of an interesting comment. And then below is my mom, who grew up a baby boomer, and she's trying to buy ice cream. And she has all these varieties of ice cream, and she's trying to find a specific ice cream. And she is hunting for it. She is looking at every single ice cream. Because my dad likes a specific ice cream, and it was his birthday, and my mom was trying to get that ice cream for him, and she just couldn't find it. And she was just so into finding this ice cream. It was like she was hunting. And for her, this consumer industry, this culture industry, is very much so a part of her world, a part of the culture she grew up with. And it will be difficult for her to transition out of it because she is accustomed to the world where you buy a lot of products that you aren't going to use a lot. And, you must go through the store in a specific way, and you must do all these things in a specific way because that's what they're for. Whenever she goes into a mall, she feels like she's going into this major event and, she's entering into a hyper-reality state into her mind. And for me, I'm just like, it's a mall. I've had malls my entire life. We go to them all the time. It's not that interesting. And it's just kind of worn out. It's no longer fascinating to me. And that's where we're at, where, a lot of the consumer... Hi, Mike. Actually, I know what Mike did. There's this thing on the internet. We are transitioning over to the internet. And we are transitioning over to this culture industry, and it's scaring the crap out of industries because that's how they made their money. That's how they got things. And now they're trying to promote themselves as not this product or not this. And they can't quite make it. And, it's asking a lot of questions, even amongst video games, like how long will Microsoft last if nobody cares about Halo, or for the lines for Halo? And that was how they majorly promoted themselves, was those lines to buy Halo. And if there aren't lines for Halo, and if there aren't lines to buy the product, how do they make it look like this is a cultural event? And if it's not a cultural event, and they can't promote it as that, how do they promote the product to noobs? How do they promote the product to anybody? And they're kind of lost on what to do. And the same thing is happening to Sony. Nintendo has a different setup because have been in the industry so long, and they tend to make they make a superior product and a very, very different type of audience promotion. So, they're not too worried about it. In fact, the Switch is doing just fine. They recognized that their consumer was going to start moving around a lot more, so they switched, and they accepted this, whereas Sony and Microsoft don't quite know what to do. And it's a fascinating thing. So here we have, these events, these Comic-Cons, these bookstores, these grocery stores, these TV ads, all of that stuff that's being used to kind of sell events and ideas and all this stuff to you. And, the reality is a lot of those pictures, you're walking around in a convention and you take pictures of people. Really, it's to promote the promotion of the convention is the pictures of all those cosplayers. And once you get accustomed to it, it's not as big in your mind because everybody's dressed, or because there's so many people dressed up, and it becomes common. And so this becomes a promotion to other people. And I kind of want to ask, how many people come as noobs as opposed to, kind of the veterans? And how does that transition in and out? Like some shows, they have the same people come every year. And, how do you bring in more people? And then other shows, they bring in a lot of people, but not a lot of them come in more. And how do you keep people? And that's asking a lot of questions. And next week, we're going to talk about how video games and real life kind of converge into one, and how this has created kind of a problem for people who study it. And, we're going to talk about real life games, but we're going to talk about how schools and malls and places that, are very common are designed like video games. Hi, Brian. Blah, 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 blah. And, how this is kind of a scary thought, and how video game people are actually scared to admit that that's happening. And why. And we'll get into that next week. So catch you all later. Bye now.